David never imagined his own family capable of such familial betrayal. He had grown up hearing stories about his grandmother Evelyn's house, an imposing wooden mansion in the suburbs of Boston, where every piece of furniture seemed to whisper a family secret. But upon returning to settle the inheritance paperwork, he found a stranger living there. A well-dressed lawyer handed him a contract already signed. The house had been sold, without his signature, without his permission. How was this possible? Confusion quickly gave way to outrage, and, deep down, an unsettling certainty. Something was very wrong with this story. Heirs and inheritance disputes were always a minefield, but David trusted that his family would never do something so blatant. His uncle Martin, who had always circled Evelyn's fortune like a vulture, assured him that everything was legally resolved. "We needed the money," he said, without even looking away. But the story didn't add up. How could they have sold a property that, according to the will, belonged exclusively to him? The answer was in the documents, but no one seemed interested in explanations, only in sweeping everything under the rug. A sense of injustice and vengeance began to bubble inside him. Martin, the same man who once almost lost the house in a corruption and financial crime scheme, now posing as the family benefactor. Something didn't make sense. David decided to take action. If there was a legal loophole, he would find it. He grabbed the will, the property records, every paper signed in the last 10 years. With each page, a conspiracy and manipulation seemed to unfold before his eyes. Nothing was as it seemed. It was then that he found the clause. Hidden among the technical paragraphs and rushed signatures, one line changed everything. Any sale of the property without the express signature of the primary beneficiary would be null and void. A safeguard left by Evelyn, as if she knew exactly the kind of family she had. The weight of that discovery made him take a deep breath. They thought they had been clever. But this clause completely changed the game. David knew that having reason wasn't enough. He needed proof, and fast. He called a lawyer friend, Jack, a specialist in fraud and forgery. They not only sold without your signature, but they manipulated the documents to make it look legitimate. This isn't just unethical, it's a crime. The word hung in the air. Crime. Suddenly, the case went from being just a family feud to a battle for justice. Confronting Martin and the others involved, David realized the true scale of the scheme. It wasn't just the house. There were suspicious financial transactions in his grandmother's name in the months before her death. Bank transfers, forged donations, checks cashed without explanation. This went far beyond an inheritance dispute. It was a precisely orchestrated con, and he was about to dismantle it piece by piece. From that moment on, the fight wasn't just for his house, but for his grandmother's legacy and redemption. Evelyn always said that money can change people, but never makes them better. And now, even after her death, her own children were proving it. But David wasn't going to let them get away with it. He had already suffered too many losses. What was at stake wasn't just a property, but the memory of the only person who had ever believed in him. The irony was almost poetic. The same family that saw him as the idealistic grandson who never understood business now found themselves cornered by a single missing signature. The twists and shocking revelations were just beginning. If Evelyn had left this clause, did she know that something like this could happen? Or were there even more family secrets buried under those old boards? What David didn't know was that the hole was much deeper than he imagined. The more he investigated, the more pieces began to fall into place. And some of those pieces pointed to a truth that no one had ever mentioned out loud. His grandmother was smarter than everyone thought, and maybe, just maybe, she left other clues for him to discover. Now only one question remained. How far was his family willing to go to hide the truth? David knew the battle wouldn't be easy. His family had already proven what they were capable of by selling the house without his authorization, so they wouldn't back down without a fight. But what unsettled him was the naturalness with which they acted, as if deceiving a legitimate heir was just a technicality, a small obstacle to be overcome. Conspiracy and manipulation seemed to be a natural talent in that house, and now, with the clause in hand, he was about to turn the tables. He went to the notary's office to verify the authenticity of the documents. The surprise came quickly. One of the papers had a signature that wasn't his but perfectly imitated his handwriting. Fraud and forgery. The pieces fit together. Martin, or someone close to him, had forged his authorization to complete the sale. It was something big, dirty, and illegal. But it was also his greatest advantage. Now he had something no one there expected. Concrete proof that the sale was illegal. Jack, his lawyer and friend, suggested a bold step: Sue the family and demand the contract be annulled? But David hesitated. He wanted justice and revenge, but he didn't want it to turn him into someone like them. Still, letting it all pass wasn't an option. His grandmother had trusted him for a reason. He needed to prove that her memory was worth more than a handful of dirty money. Before filing a lawsuit, he decided to test those involved. At a forced family dinner, he threw out bait. I reviewed the documents and noticed something interesting. It seems there are people here who know how to sign my name better than I do. The silence was instant. Martin kept his composure, but gripped his glass harder than he should have. His sister Laura looked away, and his cousin Madison fiddled with her phone as if nothing was happening. They knew. And they were nervous. The next morning, he received a strange call, an unknown number, a distorted voice. For your own good, let it go. It's already settled. Corruption and financial crimes were nothing new in Martin's circle, but anonymous threats? That meant the truth was much worse than he imagined. Evelyn wouldn't have left that clause by chance. If he kept digging, what else would he find? His next steps needed to be calculated. With Jack's help, he gained access to his grandmother's bank records in the last weeks of her life. The bomb came quickly, large transfers made to offshore accounts. But the question was, why? Evelyn never needed to hide money, unless she was trying to protect someone. Or something. And then, among bank statements and dubious contracts, he found a document that shouldn't exist. An old will, dated 5 years before the official one. In it, the house wasn't just for him, but for another name. A name that no one had ever mentioned in the family. A hidden heir. A family secret buried for years. If Evelyn had made a will like that but changed it later, there was a reason. And if that other heir hadn't been mentioned in the final will, someone made sure to erase him from history. Now, David needed to find out who that person was and why his grandmother changed her mind. But one thing was certain. Someone in the family knew the answer and was willing to do anything to keep it hidden. David stared at the name on the old will as if it were a riddle waiting to be deciphered. Jonathan Heir. The surname didn't ring any bells, but if his grandmother considered him a legitimate heir before changing her mind, there was something there. Family secrets were almost a tradition among the Heirs, but this omission was too big to be accidental. Why would Evelyn have left the house to someone outside the known family circle and then gone back on it? He decided to start with the obvious, ask Martin. He didn't expect him to cooperate, but the reaction would say a lot. During a forced lunch, he asked the question with the casualness of someone asking for the time. Does the name Jonathan Heir mean anything to you? Martin's fork stopped midair. Too small to be noticed by anyone, but David was paying attention to the details now. Martin laughed. Never heard of him. A lie. Laura looked away at her napkin. Another lie. The tense silence at the table was the answer he needed. They knew. If his family wasn't going to open their mouths, he would need to find Jonathan on his own. Jack, ever efficient, managed to track down a man with that name in a psychiatric hospital in Vermont. Institutionalized for 8 years. Right around the time Evelyn changed the will. Coincidence? David didn't believe it anymore. He got in the car and drove there. The truth was waiting for him, and by now, not finding out was more dangerous than remaining ignorant. Jonathan Heir wasn't what David expected. A man in his 50s with a lost look, a face that resembled someone, but who? When he mentioned Evelyn, his eyes lit up for a moment. My mother? The word made David's heart stop. Mother? If Jonathan was telling the truth, that changed everything. His grandfather had had a son before David's own mother and had hidden him from the world. A firstborn son erased from the Heir family history. A legitimate heir. Evelyn had a son that no one had ever mentioned. The revelation hit him like a punch to the stomach. Conspiracy and manipulation weren't just things Martin was doing now. They had been part of the family for generations. Jonathan had been hidden, silenced, erased from the records. But Evelyn, in her last years of life, had tried to correct that mistake. She wanted to give him what was rightfully his, until someone convinced her to change her mind. David returned home with his head spinning. If Jonathan was the original heir, Martin and the rest of the family had known about it for years. And more importantly, they had done everything to prevent that truth from coming to light. Jonathan was out of the final will, institutionalized and forgotten, while Martin and the others profited. Corruption and financial crimes, fraud and forgery, it all fit. They stole not only his house, but Jonathan's right to his own identity. Looking now at the empty mansion, David knew that the fight wasn't just for him. It was for the legacy and redemption of someone who never had the chance to be part of his own family. But how to prove it? How to face people who had already proven that they are willing to do anything to hide the past? There was only one way out. Make this story public. David felt the weight of the truth in his hands. Jonathan Hale was the legitimate heir to the house, but his existence had been erased, and now his own family wanted to bury him forever. Conspiracy and manipulation were no longer just abstract words. They were part of the Hale blood. If they forged documents to sell his house, what else would they have done to keep the money flowing? He knew that it wasn't enough to confront them. The only way to win was to hold them accountable before the law and public opinion. But he needed to act fast. If Jonathan really was his mother's brother, then there was a legal trail that could prove it. Birth certificate, medical records, something that tied this story to concrete facts. But where to find that evidence if the family had erased any mention of him? Jack, his lawyer, conducted a search. Jonathan's records had been mysteriously sealed 8 years ago, the same period when Evelyn changed the will and his family began moving money suspiciously. That wasn't a coincidence. Corruption and financial crimes always came with dirty hands in the right places. Someone within the system helped keep Jonathan forgotten. If he wanted justice and revenge, he needed an ally within the system itself. And that's when he remembered Rachel Porter, an investigative reporter who had already exposed a scheme of embezzlement within registry offices. David didn't have time for beating around the bush. He set up a meeting with her in a discreet cafe and went straight to the point. My family illegally sold my house and forged documents to hide an heir they erased from history. I have proof. Rachel's eyes lit up. If that's true, it's not just an inheritance case. It's a scandal. The reporter started digging. In less than a week, she gained access to an old birth certificate that proved that Jonathan was Evelyn Hale's legitimate son. That meant that he was entitled to the inheritance from the beginning. But the biggest bombshell came soon after. A medical document indicated that Jonathan had been diagnosed as mentally incapacitated soon after his mother changed the will. Too much of a coincidence. That smelled of fraud and forgery. David couldn't waste any more time. He prepared everything to reveal the truth in the most devastating way possible. The media, the court, the internet. If his family wanted to hide a secret, he would make it too big to be ignored. Rachel's article would be published the next morning. The twists and shocking revelations were about to explode. But then, in the early hours of the morning before publication, his phone rang. Unknown number. Cold voice on the other end of the line. If I were you, I'd let it go. For your own good. The threat was now direct. But that only proved that he was on the right track. David felt a chill run down his spine as he hung up the phone. Anonymous threats were now part of the game. But if someone was desperate enough to intimidate him, it meant that the truth was about to come out. The house, the inheritance, and the family secrets were no longer just a dispute over material possessions. They were a moral battleground. Corruption and financial crimes had kept Jonathan in oblivion, and now David was the only thing between his family and justice. The next morning, the article was published. The headline blared, "The Forgotten Heir: How the Hale Family Erased a Son to Steal His Fortune." Within hours, the article went viral. Social media exploded in outrage. Selling a house illegally was already bad, but manipulating documents, institutionalizing a legitimate heir, and forging signatures? That was a scandal worthy of court. The impact was immediate. The lawyer representing the buyers of the house contacted David. They wanted to cancel the purchase before their names were dragged into the scandal. That meant the house could still be reverted to David. But he wanted more. He wanted to expose Martin and the other conspirators so that they could never do something like that again. That same night, the family gathered for one last attempt at damage control. Martin, for the first time, seemed tense. "David, we can resolve this without involving the police." Laura tried to persuade him. "Think about the family, about our reputation." But David laughed. "You only care about reputation when the dirt comes out, not when you're doing the dirty deeds." And then he dropped the bomb. "I've filed a lawsuit. You'll face criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and misappropriation of inheritance." The silence was deafening. The shadow of justice finally fell upon them. The twists and shocking revelations had reached their peak. In court, the facts were undeniable. Jonathan Hale existed. He was entitled to the house. The will had been manipulated. Faced with the evidence, the court ruled to annul the sale and return the property to the true heir. But when they asked David if he wanted to keep the house or pass it on to Jonathan, he knew the answer before he even opened his mouth. It was never his. It had always been his. As he signed the papers officially transferring the house to his mother's long-lost brother, David felt something unexpected. Peace. He had not only won, he had done what was right. But as he left the courthouse, he noticed a disturbing detail. Martin didn't seem defeated. In fact, he had a slight smile on his lips, as if he knew something that David didn't yet know. David should feel relief. He won. His house was recovered, and more than that, Jonathan's story was finally exposed, but something didn't seem right. Martin accepted defeat too easily. He was a man who fought for every penny, who would never admit a loss without trying to twist the situation in his favor. So, why did he seem so calm? It was only weeks later that David realized why. The Heir family wasn't just manipulative, they were patient. While he was celebrating the victory in court, Martin's lawyers were already working on an appeal. They wanted to annul the decision on the grounds that Jonathan wasn't mentally fit to manage an estate. In other words, they would try to take the house again, now, through legal channels. It was a low blow, but predictable. Corruption and financial crimes don't just work in secret. They survive because the right people know where to pull the strings. If he wanted to truly protect Jonathan, he would have to go beyond just handing over the house. He would have to ensure that he was safe, legally and financially. But this fight wasn't just David's. Jonathan also needed to fight for himself. For the first time in years, he would have to prove that he was still a man capable of deciding his own destiny. And David promised that he would be by his side. Justice can be slow, and the truth comes at a price. But in the end, Evelyn's memory was restored. Jonathan got his life back. And David discovered that an inheritance isn't just made of material possessions. It's made of character, courage, and the willingness to face whatever it takes to correct what is wrong. And what about the Heir family? Well, let them try again. This time, he's ready. Now tell me, what would you have done in David's place? Would you fight against your own family for justice? Or would you accept the loss to avoid conflict? Comment here and share this story with those who need to understand that inheritance goes far beyond money. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss the next stories.
Hi, you are on the Moving Narratives channel. Subscribe and follow our stories.